Hi, my name is Jim Pethokoukis, and I am the Money and Politics columnist at U.S. News and World Report magazine and usnews.com, where I also write the Capital Commerce blog. And today I'm going to be talking about the election and the economy with my friend John Tamny, who will introduce himself, I guess.
Hi, I'm John Tamny, and I am editor of RealClearMarkets.com, a markets aggregation website. Plus, I serve as a senior economist for both H.C. Wainwright Economics and Toreador Research and Trading.
That is an impressive resume. At this point, I may actually just leave the office.
You flatter me,
Jim. I'm dealing with. I like calling him John the Brain Tamny. On the blog, I talk about John's writings a lot, and I refer to him as either a friend of the blog or John the Brain Tamny. So he's an imposing intellect that I'll be dealing with here today. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the economy and the election. And if you don't mind, John, I think I'd like to first talk about the first part of that just a bit. I know when I go out and I talk to people or I get comments into my blog, as amazing as it seems to me, people ask, are we headed into some sort of, not just recession, are we headed into a Great Depression? I'm talking 1930s, Apple's street corner, I don't know, maybe we're all being kind of, black and white or something. You're the economist on that, so I'm going to let you start, and I'll tell you maybe why you're right or wrong. Are we headed into another depression?
Well, we're certainly, I don't think, heading into another depression, because if we were, for one, we'd see it in stock market indices that would be a lot lower than they presently are. But I am a bit more skeptical than some of the more bullish commentators out there, and that the GDP number continues to rise, I think, is very irrelevant. If we based it on that, then Jimmy Carter had a great presidency, because GDP rose all 4 years of his presidency. I think the better thing to look at is, in fact, the dollar. And I think a weak dollar, and we've certainly had that in this decade, really since 2001.
So what does that do? So the dollar's going down, GDP's going up, unemployment's rising a bit, but it's still at historically low levels. Why should I care about the dollar if unemployment's still relatively low, the economy is still expanding? Last time I checked, recessions where economies shrink, the economy's still getting bigger. That to me sounds like maybe not a real strong expansion, but not a recession yet, is it? Or
well, but I think the best measure of our economic health is the stock market. I mean, the stock market is a market measure that tells us about optimism about the U.S. economy. And if you look at this decade, and really the past 10 years, the S&P 500 has been flat, and that is a signal that the economy is not as great as many assume. And what you then want to look for is, why is that the case? And I argue that the weak dollar basically bats 1,000 in terms of predicting somewhat bearish to flat markets that make the electorate very unhappy. So, well, maybe
you think that people can sense the dollar. I mean, it used to be, way back, people think, people were idiots like 150 years ago, but back in the 1800s, all those farmers, they knew about inflation, they knew about the dollar, they knew about currencies. Do you think people now really understand that the dollar is weak, or do they just, they need to hear on news? How do people know that, and do you think they understand that?
I think the electorate is a lot smarter than people think. As you pointed out to me before, most politicians say you can't talk about the dollar, but the electorate knows that the dollar's weak. So all they need to do is go to the gas station and see that they're paying over $4 a gallon when they were paying in the $1 range 10 years ago. All they need to do is go to the grocery store and see that all manner of goods cost more. And where this shows up the most, though, I think, is it shows up in wages. And I don't want to get into whether wages are rising or falling, but when you debase the currency, what you also do is you put a bullseye on the earnings of the average American, because when savers see their dollars being debased, as has happened in the last few years, there is an investment slowdown that's shown up in the stock market, but ultimately shows up in the wages of the average worker.
But we had this economic report that came out, said the economy grew 1.9% in the second quarter. Maybe they'll revise it, who knows, maybe closer to 3%. And they said that one of the big reasons it wasn't down is because of trade, because trade was so strong. I mean, wasn't trade strong because of the weak dollar? Is that what we need right now? Is a stronger dollar? Isn't the weak dollar helping us?
Well, there's two paradoxes there. First of all, there's this assumption out there that we could just export our way to prosperity. Well, that's a big myth. The only reason we're able to export something is because we're buying something from someone else. All trade balances, and so the idea that you can do this is wrong-headed. Secondly,
so we shouldn't care about the trade deficit.
Oh no, the trade deficit is a big myth. All trade balances. I run a trade deficit with my landlord, my bartender, my dry cleaner, but I run a trade surplus with my employers. We have to
how deep is your trade deficit with your bartender? I think
it's pretty high, and so I'm trying to bring it down right now. Yes.
Okay. So even though it seems to be helping in the short term right now, a weak dollar, you think it's right? Is it helping in the short term at all, or is it its negative consequences overwhelming?
I don't think it helps at all. I mean, if a weak dollar were the path to prosperity, then we'd all be moving to Argentina right now. But in fact, a weak dollar, what it does is it retards investment, distorts investment also, and ultimately slows down the economy. I can devalue the inch to make it half of an inch, and I can be 12 feet tall, but I'll still be 6 feet tall. And the idea that we can make our goods more competitive by driving down the dollar is mythical, because ultimately we create goods where we bring in imported inputs from around the world. Those are going to cost more. There's no way that you can escape the terms of trade with dollar debasement.
I'm guessing that perhaps the Chinese have done some devaluation, which how come they can get those gymnasts, those like 8-year-old gymnasts to beat our gymnasts? I mean, that's crazy. I'd like to talk about China a little bit later. Maybe not so much about the gymnastics. I'm furious about that.
The China's a very good example, and the way we jawbone them to strengthen the value of their currency. That'd be the equivalent of the Chinese coming to us and saying, you know what, we're mad that the average American is taller than us, so we're going to devalue the inch so we can be the same height as Americans. It's an absurdity if they did it. It's absurd when we try to do it to make alleged gains in trade.
Right. Just looking at the economy, looking like where it's going, is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? In my blog, Capital Commerce, usnews.com, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic, I think, than certainly the rest of the media, than a lot of economists out there. I've been fairly upbeat, though that's not to say I'm not worried. Obviously the economy has slowed dramatically. Unemployment is rising. There's a big inflation issue out there looming. But I guess what I'm concerned is that as maybe dicey as things are, there's not a situation so bad that stupid government policy can't make it worse. And what I worry about is that we're going to do things that no matter whether you think the economy is headed to a recession, just weak, that we're going to do things which could make it a lot worse. And particularly, I worry about higher taxes. I worry about protectionism. Heading into next year with possible new Congress, do you worry about the economy more so because of what the government might do, or are you again worried more about the macroeconomic factors?
Well, but I think they're both tied together. So my worries are the same as yours. Economies, by definition, adjust. A capitalist economy, all it is one individual trying to make things easier for another. And so the problem is the government always inserts itself. And so with higher taxes, all the government's doing is pushing capital out of the private economy, which is a bullseye on the average person's earnings. In the same way, protectionism, all it does is it retards the process whereby we get up every day to do the things we do. We get up and work so that we can trade, and if you put up barriers to do it, you take away the reason for us to work. That's a big economic negative. So yes, the government will make what should be a minor blip into something much worse if left unchecked.
I wrote a cover story on this, and I'm looking at the issue. Is big government coming back? I know the Wall Street Journal had a big article calling the unraveling of Reaganomics, the unraveling of Reagan. Do you? Let me get your opinion, then I'll jump back in. Do you think that the pendulum is tilting, and that we're about to enter an era of much more bigger, much more intrusive, higher tax government, depending on who wins, or maybe regardless of who wins, whether it's McCain or whether it's Obama?
I think we're already there. I mean, let's look at this past decade. I mean, if we want to talk about Sarbanes-Oxley, or we want to talk about the drug bill, we want to talk about the various housing bailouts, we're back with big government, and I hate to be a broken record, but that is the problem. John Maynard Keynes wasn't right about everything, but one thing he said is when you devalue the currency, you discredit enterprise. And so this decade we've seen a major devaluation of the dollar, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 70s, when enterprise was similarly discredited, and this is what you get. And that's why I'm so scared. I think we're headed for bigger government no matter who's in office, and that's a scary thing.
Right. I mean, what I think there is a sort of a counterbalance that I think makes it different today than perhaps if you think that the last basically 25 years has been sort of the a move toward lower taxes, freer markets, all the Reagan free market stuff. I think one difference today is that I think economies are so much more open to competition. Currencies are traded more widely, debt is traded more widely, and that every day markets can vote, and of course stock markets as well. They can vote on the government's policy. If it starts doing something stupid, you'll see people. We've already seen the dollar week. They'll jump out of the stock market. I don't think a government can run sort of anti-market policies for very long, given that the economy is so open to the market that eventually global investors, these so-called the bond market vigilantes, people who would sell bonds that didn't like your policies. I think that those market forces will ultimately constrain a government from doing really dumb things for very long. Or am I being too optimistic?
Oh, no, I don't think you're being too over-optimistic. I agree with you. I mean, as you put it so well, the markets are a great voting booth on what, in fact, the government's doing. What scares me is the U.S. is an enormous economic concept, and so it can take a lot of body blows, and it clearly has over the last 10 years, going back to the flat S&P 500. What worries me is not so much the scene. I don't think we're headed for breadlines or anything, but what kills me here is the unseen, what we could be doing if the government had just stayed out of the way. And I would add, if Bush had gotten one policy right of maintaining a stable dollar, I think he's a popular president today for one thing, and I don't think we're looking at this big resumption of big government that is going to be problematic. Won't kill us because the markets will save us, but it's going to make things a lot worse than it otherwise would have been.
Now, I think the concept you're talking about, and I could be getting it wrong. I'm not a professional economist, though I play one on TV. I remember a key economics class in college. I had to share a book with my roommate. There was a fist fight over the book. Because of that, I could have missed key chapters. But I think what you're talking about is there was an opportunity cost here. There's an opportunity cost we're seeing sort of what is unseen, what we've missed out on, and had we done different things over the past 10 years, we wouldn't be talking about a flat stock market. We wouldn't be talking about, what I think is an amazing number, and I tend to be pretty upbeat. But I was running the numbers. If you look at the 90s, how many quarters of really good economic growth, over 3.5%, over 4.5%. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there were a series of quarters where we had over 5%. I call that hyper growth in the 1990s. I think we've had one really outstanding quarter of growth in this decade. So you talk about all these problems, income inequality, income volatility, wages aren't doing it. It's pretty easy. You grow the economy faster. I don't think we're talking about those and all these worker concerns and all this stuff about worker anxiety.
We certainly aren't. We shouldn't be in this situation, and it's what Bastiat always said. There's the seen and the unseen. And the seen here is we're relatively prosperous, but the unseen is what we could be doing.
Now, as a French economist, right? Bastiat is a French economist?
Yeah, and it was also, by the way, when Ronald Reagan was asked who his favorite economist was, he said, that's easy, Frederick Bastiat. So there we go.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
As in my official bio, I was on Jeopardy. But I think maybe you should be on Jeopardy. That's an excellent piece of political economic trivia you have given us today, John Tamny.
Yeah, it's what little I have. A mind for the trivial, but I think you beat me in Jeopardy.
No, I'm lucky. I got a lot of questions about journalism and cartoons. I have a big family, so all the cartoon questions I got, I just ran the board. It's unbelievable. So we're both concerned about the economy. Economy's going to have a big impact on the election. Foreign policy, Iraq, Afghanistan, that stuff's all, fallen by the wayside compared to the economy, particularly energy. So let's talk for a second about, we have two candidates, both have fancy schmancy economic plans. Let's take a minute to look at both. Let's take, first of all, do you think John McCain can traditionally, if you're from the incumbent party, and it's a bad economy. You lose the election. Do you think that John McCain can win this election with an economy that, whether it's in a recession or just dramatically slowing, that most people think stinks?
I think it's going to be very difficult for him to win it for two reasons. First of all, as you well know, a lot of Republicans are very skeptical about John McCain, and the economy's not helping him. What he has potentially going for him, and I'll defer to you here because you follow this much more astutely than I do, is I think his best chance is that Obama beats himself. He's got to hope that Obama makes some major mistakes, because otherwise I think it's going to be very tough for John McCain to say that Republicans deserve another 4 years. And this is coming from a Republican.
Now, those polls are close.
Yeah.
So, I mean, right now, I mean, where's the, everyone keeps wondering, where's the blowout? Why isn't it a 10-point gap? Because obviously you have concerns about foreign policy, but obviously you have people think the economy stinks. Why do you think that people just... I mean, my answer is, why isn't the economy hurting John McCain worse? Is that because he is a quote-unquote different kind of Republican? He's not the vice president. He's not the president. I look back, and really, you've had very rarely have you had a situation, I think only really once in the past century or so, where you had a presidential election year with a weak economy and also no incumbent running. There's only been 1 year,
That's right.
And that was like 1920. So that's one data point. We have a situation like this: election year, weak economy, no incumbent, and so I'm not sure. I'm not sure it does necessarily hurt John McCain the way people think it does. I think that's evidenced by the fact that the polls continue to be so close. Now I'll tell you that when I talk to people from the McCain campaign, or closely linked to the McCain campaign, I mean, obviously they think they want their guy to win, and they think they have a good puncher's chance to win. But there's certainly a segment that is very worried that they're gonna hang close, and then it's just going to open up in October. So I don't know. It's obviously I think McCain would rather be running under a strong economy, but I don't think it kills his. I don't think it kills his chances.
I think you're probably right. And the other thing McCain's got going for him is, I can certainly point to a lot of Republicans, including maybe me, who will no longer admit to being a Republican. But I think in the same way, there's a lot of that dissatisfaction on the Democratic side of the political spectrum. Lest we forget, Bush's approval ratings are very low, but a democratically controlled Congress's ratings are even lower.
Right.
And so we have a situation.
You rarely hear that, though. I hear about the Bush's approval ratings. My gosh, Pelosi and company even lower. For some reason, that message doesn't get out. I don't understand why.
It's not out, but that possibly explains why McCain is not getting the blame or credit, however you want to put it, for the Bush economy, because I think a lot of people out there, I think there's just great dissatisfaction with both parties among their base, not to mention the fact that I think a lot of people are chasing at this point that they fall for these allegedly wonderful leaders who invariably disappoint them. And so,
why is there a third party there? Why isn't this? If there was ever a year where I thought there'd be a third party, you have turmoil in foreign policy, turmoil in economic policy.
But Jim, you know the answer to that. And this is the thing that really scares me. One of the things that scares me about McCain is that he's a big campaign finance reform guy, and talk about an economic negative where some guy like Jim Pethokoukis couldn't maybe get 4 or 5 rich guys to bankroll his campaign. The simple reality is you can never be president. And
I have a vast network of potential contributors. It's vast, it's deep. Much of it is ill-gotten gains, illicit, off the books, off the grid kinds of gains. But I could tap it.
I want you to be president.
The year's not over yet. The year's not over yet, John.
I want you to be president, and I'd like for people. We could have a third party if we deregulated the process whereby people
open it up,
exercise their free speech. It's a huge negative to markets when voters and the markets voting on this realize that there's just a major incumbency power in Washington that keeps these same fossils in there year after year. So it's a shame McCain didn't understand this to begin with.
We need an election-free market as well. I'm sure you've looked at the McCain economic plan, the Obama economic plan. Let's take McCain economic plan. Does it make sense given the current economic environment as you see it?
A little of everything. My obvious concerns are that he's still saying that Wall Street is the villain and the subprime.
What kind of Republican is that?
Yeah, what kind of Republican is that? He still says things like that capitalism needs to be reined in by the government. That's very scary. I don't like him bashing CEOs. I think that CEOs are most often getting paid what they're worth, and if we don't like it, we don't have to buy the shares of those companies. Same time, I like the fact that he's looking to reduce the corporate tax rate. That's a big positive. I think it's a positive that he wants to cut the penalty on income success. We've got to like all of that. I am skeptical, let's be honest. Republicans run on tax cuts. They don't always fulfill those pledges. My biggest dispute, and it goes back to this, though, is that I think these guys are talking in non sequitur terms. No one's talking about the big weight on the economy right now that, as I say, bats 1,000. Right. They're not talking about the weak dollar.
Right. No, you mentioned that McCain and his corporate tax cut. I mean, most people would think, if they've ever heard like a Republican issue, let's cut taxes on corporations. But what people don't realize, I try to blog about this all the time, because I try to find issues that people on the left and the right agree on, and to a great extent, cutting corporate taxes is actually one of those issues. There are all sorts of liberals who view that as a competitiveness issue. Mm-hmm. They understand we're competing with the EU and rising Asia. So they think either we should cut corporate taxes, which are the second highest in the world, or you can get rid of them. And if you're on the left and you're worried about redistribution of wealth and income inequality, they say, okay, cut the corporate taxes, but then you'll get those CEOs by raising their income taxes. But on the narrow issue of cutting corporate taxes, that to a great degree that's a bipartisan issue among the think tank crowd. Mm-hmm. But you get into the political crowd, and it just breaks down purely left and right, where McCain wants to cut corporate taxes and Obama, in a way, wants to increase them because he wants a windfall profits tax on companies. So,
well, I guess I wish, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I wish that McCain would get taxes right. And what I mean by this is he should come out and say, let's give America...
You're not persuaded yet by him?
No, because at this point I'm chastened. I had a visceral dislike for Gore, and to this day I really like George Bush. I just think he's been a very disastrous president in a lot of ways. And I want McCain to say this, because you just talked about giving people a raise. Let's give the nation a raise, and how you do that is you cut taxes on the most productive individuals in society that actually have money that will save an investment that will go towards the wages of the average American. That's how you should talk about taxes. Let's redistribute wealth towards the middle class, and you do that by cutting taxes on the rich. And McCain, I think, fundamentally doesn't understand this in the way that smart guys like you and me do.
No, very good. Overly generous, very generous.
Yeah, right?
I understand the.
See, we get this.
Deficit.
We get this, don't we?
All right. The trade deficit with your bartender is showing you're being overly generous to me. Now, we also have Obama, again, his economic plan, Obamonomics. What I find really interesting is that if you look at McCain's plan, in many ways, it's kind of what you'd expect to see from a Republican nominee. Wants to keep those Bush tax cuts, lower corporate taxes, talks about free trade. What's interesting, I think more interesting, frankly, about what Obama is saying is that he is really arguing for something different than what the last very successful Democratic president did, which was Bill Clinton, of course, where President Clinton ended up. He signed a tax cut, free trade, budget balancing. Obama doesn't seem to be focusing on any of that. And what Obama is focusing on is really the kinds of things that candidate Bill Clinton ran on, which is kind of a putting people first agenda, spending money on infrastructure. Yes, we care about the deficit, but we'll have to get to that in time, because first we have to deal with all these investment needs that have gone unmet. So Obama is really not following what you call the successful Clinton formula, which brought 2 terms for the first Democratic president to have 2 terms since FDR. He is doing something very, very different, and I'm wondering if you've seen that, and why do you think he's doing that?
I think you're right. That's what he's been doing, and what I'm hoping is that just as Republicans run on growth conceptual ideas, I'm hoping that he ran the left, particularly in the primaries, on these dim-witted democratic ideas that would
now he would say he's running on growth, except he thinks you need to grow the economy. He has a big infrastructure spending plan. He has an energy spending plan. I had talked to his current chief economic advisor, Jason Furman. I asked him, how are you going to grow the economy? The first thing he said, well, we have this energy plan and that's going to add 5 million jobs. So he would say he wants to grow the economy just in a different way.
Yeah, well, he's not going to, and left to his own devices. Thank goodness we have what is it, checks and balances in this Constitution, because left to his own devices, he would destroy the economy. And
are there going to be checks and balances? I mean, he could have there's a good chance, and a lot of Democrats expect it, where he's going to have huge. If Obama gets elected, he's going to have huge majorities in the House and Senate, and it's almost going to be like a parliamentary government where it's all going to be one voice. Isn't that what we're going to see?
I think the tea leaves suggest major majorities, but what we have to look for at this point, it speaks to your optimism, is the markets once again respond to all of this. And Obama ultimately and the Democrats want to have a successful run of things, and so my sense is out of this we will get a very energetic Republican minority that will try to block everything. Added to that, we will get some moderate Democrats out of this that say, wait a second, we don't want to be seen as the party that took kind of a weak economy and made it much
You might be
weaker.
the optimist here. You might be the optimist, though, that we were talking about McCain, his policy. Now, there are some Republicans who think he should be going in a completely different direction. There's this book out, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, John, called Grand New Party.
I've heard about
by
it.
a couple of guys over at Atlantic Monthly wrote it. And what they're saying, just a brief recap, is that the Republican formula doesn't work anymore. To let the cut taxes. Instead, that we ought to be focusing on Republicans should be focusing on helping working class families, helping families maybe through tax credits for families, sort of helping families at the expense of helping single people. That the Republicans should sort of cast their votes for families, and that the tax cut game is over. The 25 years of cut taxes. They need to do something different. Maybe come up with a health plan that maybe involves more government. All those kinds of things. That's
what utter nonsense. I think you agree here. What hogwash. This explains why the Republicans are in trouble. It's precisely because they've moved away from the old formula that worked. Our friend Larry Kudlow always makes the good point that Republicans do one thing well, and it's called cutting taxes. So it's when they move into these little things about let's help working families and everything. You help working families by cutting taxes so that there's more capital in the economy will fund jobs. That's how you do it. You don't help them by creating government programs and nannying programs. If you want that, vote for Democrats. And here lies our problem today. If a Democrat runs against a Democrat, which is what these guys, I think it's Ross Douthat and some of the others want, we will get Democrats in power. This is what we got in these years. We got Sarbanes-Oxley, an enormous expansion of government, a debasement of the dollar, all these things that allegedly help the little people.
Those guys would argue that the cutting taxes, they've cut taxes so much that more and more people in this country don't pay any income taxes. That you can't really cut income taxes anymore. Isn't that true?
No, I think that's very untrue. I hate to get into revenue discussions, but the simple truth is we've not hit the Laffer curve yet. With tax cuts, we continue, particularly when you cut them on the most productive individuals in society, they continue to give us more money. So there's a lot more tax cutting to go, because I think what we both like is a shrinking of the amount of revenue that comes to the government. We're not there yet. So we've got
our payroll tax, for a lot of people, the payroll tax is far more onerous. And if you remember when Al Gore came out with his super fantastic $5 trillion zero energy emission plan, one thing he wanted to do was include some sort of like a carbon tax. I think he said, let's tax what we burn, not what we earn. So you would tax carbon and carbon emissions, and then you would cut people's taxes, maybe their payroll taxes, on the other end. There are a lot of Republicans who want to do the carbon tax thing. Greg Mankiw, a well-known Republican economist. I don't know. Do you think that's like is that like the tax system of the future?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. I think it's pretty naive for us to assume that they might cut taxes in one area and then switch it to a carbon tax. My own belief, of course, is that global warming is a massive human delusion, so I have a problem with what they're going to tax. But what I think we probably both like is we shouldn't be taxing productive human behavior. Right. The way we should do is we should be taxing consumption. We're never going to get to that point, but probably the ideal tax from a classical supply-side perspective would be to tax consumption and not penalize the average American for work. And so if you want to then tax carbon, be my guest, because the economy would be booming so much from people's work not being penalized that no one would even notice. So I'll take it. I'll take it with some cuts elsewhere. How about that?
Just very fast, on a consumption tax, I mean, couldn't you just say, we're not going to tax anything you save? If you tax forget 401ks, IRAs. If we say we're just not taxing savings and investment, isn't that a consumption tax? Because there's only two things you can tax there. I mean, right? Income and whatever you don't save, you spend. So therefore, that's a consumption tax.
That would be pretty huge. I mean, I think both of us in a perfect world, if they make us president or dictator tomorrow, we would obviously zero out the capital gains tax, among others. So that would be a move in the right direction. I mean, again, the ideal scenario is that you don't tax work or investment. But if we could get to the point, I mean, it's scary to think what the economy, talk about seen and unseen if we didn't tax investment in the way that we do right now. I mean, the idea that we would penalize people for providing capital to businesses is shocking, but that's what we do.
Well, I mean, just talking about energy for a second, I mean, that's obviously probably the numero uno economic issue, and I think that's going to be sort of the core of our foreign policy, the core of our domestic policy. I think if we are going to be in a period of whether you believe in peak oil or global warming, it seems like for a variety of reasons we're not going to be back to $20 a barrel. I mean, I think we're probably going to ultimately get some sort of cap and trade system. I think we're going to ultimately get some sort of huge multi-billion-dollar, Apollo energy. Pick your historical analogy. An Apollo program for energy, a Manhattan project for energy. I think if you're an investor to be in something involved with alternative energy, my gosh, I think there's going to be so much. There's going to be a deluge of federal money flowing. Do you think we're going to move into sort of this big energy, big government area?
They're trying to move us in that direction, and as evidence that it's not working, at least in the marketplace, is these guys like T. Boone Pickens keep asking for taxpayer money to fund their loser investments.
The Pickens plan. That's a pricey plan. That's like
it is.
That's like $1 trillion.
He wants to reach into your pocket to do it. So this is my other big frustration and my anger with Bush. I seethe over him at times. Because we wouldn't be in this situation, once again, if we had not debased the dollar. I mean, the numbers change all the time, but as of last month, a barrel of oil had risen 380% in dollars since 2001 versus 160% in euros. And a lot of the reason it rose in euros is the euro has weakened alongside the dollar in recent years, just not as much. We wouldn't be having this oil discussion. The simple truth is oil is the ultimate alternative energy, and all you need to do is go onto your computer and Google oil price history and look at a graph from 1947 to 71, the last period where we had a stable dollar defined in gold. Oil was $2.30 a barrel, and it was flat all those years. It was very cheap and accessible. We don't have a supply problem. We have a problem that oil is expensive because the dollar is cheap. And it's just a shame that we're going to move in all these wasteful directions about alternative energy when we don't need to.
Maybe a couple more things. One thing, maybe this is the last thing we talk about, John. They would not let us live and work in the Washington D.C. greater area if we did not talk about the VP picks, the vice presidential picks. There's some talk that these guys are going to pick someone who knows about the economy to bolster the economic credentials, since that's such a big issue. Maybe McCain, maybe pick a Romney. I'm not sure if any of the potential Obama picks have any kind of economic credentials. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to defer to you on that because I think you know who the short list is for both. Let's talk about that. Who's McCain going to pick?
Well, I keep getting the same names over and over again, and they're all boring names. I swear, as someone who just loves politics, I would love to see just crazy names out there. I'd like to see let's say McCain, like Meg Whitman, a CEO. I don't know, a general, somebody to know. I mean, the people who end up being on the short list are the names that we've all heard about, which are Mitt Romney, which are this guy Rob Portman, a former trade rep, and this guy Tim Pawlenty from Minnesota, the governor up there. Those are always on the short list. I keep hearing that we're not going to get any wild, fun, interesting picks. Just the same old, same old.
What about Obama? What's the story there?
I think that in a way is a tough one. I think the short list is bigger. I mean, if I still had a place to bet, I think he might go the also the extremely boring route, which is go for like a Sam Nunn, George Mitchell. That would be more in the Cheney mode, as opposed to the Clinton Gore thematic. Let's reinforce change. We're young. Something along those lines. I mean, that's boring. Well, maybe great politics, but man, that is boring.
Do you have any inside dope on why not James Webb? Because it just seems so logical. A guy that who fought in the trenches in Vietnam has written some wonderful books about military life. He could go up against McCain so easily. Why not Webb? Did Webb not want it? Is there something we don't know?
Well, I mean, I don't know that for sure. I think it could be just they always say there's some hidden story. There might be no hidden story. He just might not want the job. He might he went from being sort of an author and kind of a private life for a while, thinking life, to suddenly committing yourself to being in the spotlight, in that bubble, being in that Washington security bubble for the next 4 years. I can't blame a guy for not wanting that. So it could be nothing more than that. John, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think we hit on a lot of things. I'd just be curious also, what about Romney on the other side? Have McCain buried the hatchet? There's like a fifth column of Romney supporters who have moved into that campaign. I have a feeling that if to a great degree, if McCain looks up at a meeting, he's going to see a bunch of Romney supporters around the table. So, those two sides have sort of come together maybe as much as they can. So it wouldn't surprise me if Romney's the pick, despite all that personal animosity during the campaign. I think it's not necessarily an exciting pick, but I think that's a real possibility. All right, well, I guess maybe we'll wrap it up. Thanks for chatting, John. Appreciate it. Thanks for bringing me into this, Jim, very much.
All right, thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.